Hey, before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You're not going to want to miss what I'm about to tell you. My name is Alex Turner. I'm 32, and I never thought anything like this could happen to me. I grew up not far from Las Vegas, always curious about the desert and the strange rumors surrounding Area 51. I was a software engineer used to crunching code in front of a screen all day, not running from what I used to think were just sci-fi fantasies. Started on a Tuesday evening. I had taken a spontaneous trip out to the desert, just me, my truck, and the camera gear I carried for landscape photography. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in a rusty orange glow, and I felt that strange kind of isolation that comes only when you're miles from any sign of civilization. I parked on a ridge I knew would give me a clear view of the horizon, pulled out my tripod, and started setting up for long exposure shots. That's when I first saw it, a light. At first, I thought it was a plane, but the movement didn't match anything I'd ever seen. It hovered, pulsating, almost like it was breathing, then darted left, right, then straight up in ways that defied any aircraft physics. My first instinct was fear, my second was curiosity. I grabbed my camera and started filming. Seconds later, the light split into three, forming a triangular pattern, and then a low hum filled the air. Not like a helicopter, not like a truck engine. Something else vibrating through the ground and my bones. I froze. I've never been superstitious, but at that moment, a primal part of my brain screamed at me to run. I didn't. I kept filming, heart hammering, rationalizing that maybe it was some military experiment. After all, I was only a few miles from Area 51. Then everything went black. Literally. I couldn't see the stars, the mountains, or even my own hands. The hum turned into a sharp, piercing tone, and suddenly, I felt weightless. Not floating exactly, more like being sucked upwards, my truck and gear vanishing below me in an instant. The next thing I remember, I was inside. Not inside a plane, not inside a building, but somewhere entirely alien. The room was circular, walls smooth and metallic, glowing with a soft bluish light. The air smelled sterile, like ozone and something else I couldn't identify. I was lying on a surface that felt cold but perfectly molded to my body. I tried to move, but my limbs felt strange, almost like they weren't fully mine. And then I saw them. Not creatures exactly, at least not in a way I could immediately understand. Humanoid shapes, tall, thin, with elongated limbs and heads that tilted unnaturally. Their skin, or whatever covered their bodies, was pale, almost translucent, shimmering slightly. Their eyes, I don't even know how to describe them. Not black, not reflective, but deep, like they were looking into the very fabric of my thoughts. I panicked, tried to scream, but no sound came out. One of them stepped closer, and a voice, no, not a voice, more like a thought, entered my mind. Do not fear. Observation only. I wanted to struggle, to bolt, but I couldn't. My body was unresponsive, yet I could see, hear, and think clearly. They moved around me silently, inspecting my arms, my face, even my eyes, as if cataloging every detail. I realized then that time didn't feel normal. Seconds stretched, minutes vanished, and I couldn't tell how long I was in that room. Occasionally, one would touch something on a console, and a holographic projection appeared in midair. Earth maps, cities, strange symbols I couldn't comprehend. At some point, I recognized my own town highlighted, and I felt a wave of fear so intense it almost overwhelmed me. Were they planning something? Observing me because of where I lived? Or was I just one of countless humans they monitored? And then, just as suddenly as it began, I was back in the desert. My truck was parked exactly where I had left it, my camera still on the tripod. The last shot I took frozen on the screen, showing the triangular lights disappearing over the horizon. I shook, vomiting a little in the dirt. My hands were trembling, my mind racing. I kept looking around, expecting another pulse of light, another hum, but the desert was silent. The only sound was the wind brushing against the rocks and sand. I knew I had to get out of there, Every rational part of my brain told me to drive straight to the nearest town, call someone, anyone, but another part, the part that had stared into those alien eyes, whispered, "They are watching. Always." I got in the truck and started driving, trying to process what happened, trying to convince myself I had hallucinated, had some kind of seizure, maybe even some military mind experiment gone wrong. But deep down, I knew it was real. Too real. And the unease didn't go away in the coming days. Every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw their eyes, felt their presence. And then, last night, when I was alone in my apartment, I saw a light outside the window, a small, hovering glow that moved with impossible speed. My blood ran cold. I wanted to believe it was a drone or a helicopter, but my gut screamed differently. They hadn't finished with me. I don't know how long this is going to last or what they want. I just know I can't stay still. Every time I try to sleep, I feel them closer, as if the desert wasn't enough. They can find me anywhere. And now, I'm sharing this with you because I don't know who else to tell. If you think this is a story, a hoax, or a fantasy, maybe it is. But I know the truth. They exist. And they're patient. I couldn't sleep last night. Not a wink. My mind racing with every possible scenario, every angle, every fear. I kept thinking about that glow outside my window, about the way it moved, almost alive, like it was testing me, measuring my reactions. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the city lights, a reflection, something explainable, but the rational part of me was exhausted. I decided to drive back into the desert, to the place where it all started, hoping that maybe distance and isolation would help me understand what happened, or at least give me a sense of control. The drive was long, winding through empty highways under a sky crowded with stars. I kept scanning for lights, for movement, anything out of the ordinary, and then I saw it again. A faint pulse on the horizon, slow at first, then accelerating toward me. My heart pounded, but I felt an odd mixture of terror and curiosity, like some part of me couldn't resist it. As I approached, the glow grew, revealing a shape that defied comprehension. It was large, triangular, hovering silently above the sand, perfectly still, yet somehow massive. I stopped the truck, breath shallow, and watched it. Then, without warning, it emitted a flash of light that filled the entire windshield, blinding me for a moment, and I felt that same strange pull, the sensation of weightlessness, the world vanishing beneath me. When my vision cleared, I was standing on a platform inside that same circular room. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. The walls now shimmered with holographic projections I could almost understand. Lines connecting cities, symbols rotating slowly, images of humans I didn't recognize, as if they were observing more than just me. The humanoid figures were there, moving with precision, their elongated limbs gliding across the floor without a sound. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I remembered the thought voice, the calm intrusion in my mind. Observation only, participation optional. They seemed to sense my panic, or maybe they were reading it. One approached and placed a hand near my temple. Suddenly, images flooded my mind, visions of my own memories, fragments of my childhood, my mistakes, moments of fear and happiness interlaced with scenes I had never lived, impossible landscapes, impossible architecture, glimpses of other planets, other worlds. I staggered backward, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity, the sensory overload, but they didn't stop. They seemed to guide me, pushing and pulling my thoughts, showing me things I could barely process. I realized then that this was what they did. They weren't just abductors. They were archivists, explorers, maybe even scientists, cataloging not just humans, but experiences, emotions, memories. I wanted to resist, but resisting seemed pointless, and somehow I knew they weren't hostile, not in the sense we understand. They were curious, relentless, patient. Hours, maybe days, passed. I had no way of measuring time. I was fed images, sounds, concepts, everything from the evolution of life on Earth to the possibility of other dimensions. When they finally released me back into the desert, I collapsed in the sand, exhausted, my mind buzzing with knowledge I couldn't fully grasp. I tried to take notes, record my thoughts, but the pen felt foreign in my hand, my own language insufficient to describe what I had experienced. Driving back home, I noticed changes in myself, heightened awareness, flashes of understanding, a sense of connection to something far beyond human comprehension. But there was fear too, a constant awareness that I was being watched, that my movements, my choices, my very thoughts were not entirely my own anymore. And then, last night, as I sat trying to piece together the fragments of memory and the visions they implanted, the glowing presence returned, hovering just outside my window, pulsating slowly. I realized they weren't just visitors. They were patient, methodical, waiting for something I didn't understand. I don't know if they want to communicate, recruit, or simply study me, but the truth is clear. They can reach me anywhere, and they are never truly gone. My life has changed irreversibly, the world I knew replaced with a constant awareness of the unknown, a feeling that every shadow, every light in the sky, every sound carries their presence. And the worst part is, I think I'm beginning to anticipate it, almost longing to understand the next step, even though I know it may be more than I can handle. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn back, that the desert, the sky, the very air around me was calling me toward them. I started researching obsessively everything I could find about Area 51, UFO sightings, abductions, secret military experiments, anything that might explain what happened. Nights turned into a blur of forums, old declassified documents, grainy photos, eyewitness accounts. Then, through some obscure post buried deep in a forum, I found mention of others. People who claimed to have been taken, to have experienced the same weightlessness, the same visions, the same inability to resist. I reached out, cautiously, using encrypted email addresses and pseudonyms. Responses trickled in, stories that mirrored mine in terrifying detail. Lights in the desert, sudden disappearance, vivid experiences in otherworldly rooms, encounters with beings that were neither alive nor fully mechanical, memories that weren't entirely their own. One person, calling himself David, told me something that shook me to the core. They're not just observing. They're learning from us, from Earth, and one day you'll understand why. But the first step is trust. Trust. That word felt like poison and salvation at once. I didn't know if I could ever trust them, but deep inside, a part of me knew he was right. I had to learn to cooperate or be consumed by fear. The next evening, I returned to the desert, camera in hand, trying to capture something tangible, some evidence of what I had seen. The triangle appeared again, low and slow, pulsating as if aware of my presence. My hands shook, but I approached, and the flash of light returned, pulling me upward, into that room that now felt both alien and familiar. They didn't speak, but I felt their awareness, the same intrusive calm as before. I focused, trying to push past panic, trying to communicate with them in the only way I could, through thought, intention, concentration. I imagined questions, imagined concepts, and then the visions returned, not just images, but sequences, patterns, data streams, almost like they were teaching me to perceive reality differently. I saw glimpses of their world, their methods of understanding, their intricate systems of observation, and, most chillingly, their interest in humanity's choices, conflicts, and innovations. One being extended a limb toward me, its hand hovering near mine. This time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached out, and a flood of understanding passed between us. Not language, not words, but pure comprehension. I saw possibilities, outcomes, the fragile threads of human decision, and the subtle ways our civilization could be nudged or guided. They were not hostile in the traditional sense. They were curators, stewards of knowledge, but their sense of morality was alien, their patience immense. When I was released, I felt different, changed in ways I couldn't articulate. I drove back to the nearest town, noticing every detail of the desert, the wind, the stars, every sound amplified as if my senses were tuned to a new frequency. I knew I wasn't the same man who had left the city a week ago. And then, at a diner on the edge of a sleepy highway, I met someone who made my blood run cold. A woman, mid-30s, sitting alone, watching me with an intensity that made my heart skip. Her eyes were familiar, not human familiar, but like the way the beings had looked at me. She spoke first. "You've seen them too, haven't you?" I froze. No introduction, no explanation, just the certainty that we shared something unspeakable. She told me her story, eerily similar, but with a difference. She claimed to have been guided, trained even to understand, to predict, to anticipate. She warned me that observation was only the beginning, and that the more we resisted, the more invasive their attention became. And then she said something I can't forget. "They'll want you to make a choice soon, to act or not act, to interfere or simply watch. The desert isn't a place of refuge. It's a test." I left the diner, the night sky stretching endlessly above, and felt the pulse again, subtle at first, then undeniable. They were near, watching, waiting, and now I understood that my life, my thoughts, my decisions were no longer entirely my own. I felt the weight of responsibility, the terror of knowing that whatever happened next, whatever choice I made, would ripple far beyond me. And yet, a part of me, the part that had glimpsed the incomprehensible, the part that had touched the edge of understanding, couldn't resist the pull. I drove back into the desert, knowing that tonight, the encounter would change everything again, that the lights, the room, the beings would reveal more of their plan, or perhaps let me glimpse a reality I could never have imagined. The wind whispered across the sand, and I could almost hear their awareness brushing against mine, patient, deliberate, waiting for me to step fully into their world, or to refuse and remain only half seen, half known. I drove deeper into the desert than I ever had before, following a pull I couldn't name, a force that seemed to guide me as much as fear pushed me forward. The sky above was clear, stars blazing, and yet there was a shimmer, subtle at first, then unmistakable, triangular lights appearing on the horizon, larger, closer, and impossibly still. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but my mind was calm in a way I didn't understand. I knew this was the culmination of everything that had happened, the moment when observation would turn into revelation. The lights enveloped me in a sudden brilliance, and again, I was weightless, transported into the circular room I had come to know so intimately. Yet now it felt more vast, more complex, filled with projections and symbols that defied my comprehension. The beings were there, countless now, moving in synchronized patterns, their presence overwhelming yet precise, every motion deliberate. I realized then that I was not the only human they had brought here tonight. Others stood at the edges of the room, eyes wide, some in terror, some in awe, all connected in ways I couldn't articulate. One being stepped forward, its elongated hand extended toward me, and instead of fear, I felt a profound understanding. Thoughts, visions, sensations rushed into me. Memories not my own, entire lifetimes compressed into moments, glimpses of civilizations across galaxies, the intricate web of cause and effect, the fragile balance of existence. They were not hostile, but they were patient curators of life and knowledge, and I was being offered a choice, the opportunity to become part of something greater, to observe not just Earth but the tapestry of life across space and time. I struggled, the weight of responsibility crushing, knowing that whatever I chose would ripple far beyond myself. Some humans rejected them, they showed me. Some resisted and were left only with fragments, haunted by glimpses they could not reconcile. And then I saw her, the woman from the diner, standing among the others, her eyes meeting mine, nodding ever so slightly, a signal, a reassurance. The beings pressed closer, and I felt a thread connecting me to the visions, to the memories, to the understanding they offered. I knew I could refuse, return to the desert and the world I once knew, but I also knew that part of me could never unsee, could never unlearn, could never pretend the encounter hadn't changed me forever. My mind screamed in panic, but another voice, mine, and yet something more, urged acceptance. I reached out, the contact instantaneous, and my consciousness expanded, flowing through streams of data, energy, and perception beyond human limits. I saw events I could never influence directly, yet understood their unfolding, the fragile choices of humans, the delicate balance of life on countless worlds. And then, just as suddenly, I was back in the desert, my truck on the sand, dawn breaking over the horizon, the air crisp and ordinary, yet nothing about me, about my mind or my perception was ordinary anymore. I was aware, always aware, of their presence, patient, watching, waiting for the next time. But I also carried a gift, a burden, the knowledge of what lay beyond the stars, the understanding of the threads that connected all life, and the terrifying realization that humanity was being observed, catalogued, perhaps guided, by beings whose morality was beyond our comprehension. I drove home in silence, my hands steady, my mind racing, knowing that the world I had returned to was unchanged only in appearance, but irrevocably altered in reality. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every sudden movement in the sky reminded me that I was not alone, that I had been chosen, or at least noticed, and that the desert, the night, the stars, all of it, was a stage for a presence far older, far wiser, far more patient than any human could imagine. I sit now in my apartment, writing this, sharing it because it is all I can do, because if no one believes, that is their choice, but I know the truth. They exist, they observe, they learn, and I will never again walk through life thinking I am fully in control. Every decision, every thought, every fleeting glance toward the horizon carries weight now, and I know, with a clarity that is both a gift and a curse, that the lights will return, the hum will call, and the choice, to observe, to understand, to become part of their incomprehensible design, will come again. Until then, I wait, I watch, and I remember that the desert is never empty, the stars are never still, and I am no longer entirely my own.